Welcome back to Mornings with Zerlina. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan represents Virginia's 4th District and is back with us. Good morning, Congresswoman.
Good morning.
Today marks the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. What is on your heart this morning as we reflect on the legacy and where we are today?
So, as you know, voting rights are sacred. I mean, in a government by, of, and for the people, only the perspective of, and therefore the needs will be met of people who participate. And the history of our country has been expanding the right to vote beyond the white land owning men who first had that right when the country was founded. And this is personal to me and my family, as my great grandfather had to take a literacy test and find, three white men to vouch for his character just to be able to register. My grandfather and my father paid poll taxes. I actually took my oath of office on the Bible that my dad kept his poll tax receipt in. So this is personal. And we made a lot of progress getting rid of the voter suppression tactics that I just talked about with the Voting Rights Act 60 years ago. Unfortunately, that was gutted with the Shelby case in 2013. And rather than reauthorizing and strengthening and modernizing the Voting Rights Act on a bipartisan basis, House Republicans have tried to take us back with the SAVE Act, requiring every American to prove their citizenship through documents that cost money, a modern day poll tax, as they try to rig the rules for midterms through mid-session redistricting, mid-decade redistricting. And as we see more and more voter suppression and intimidation tactics as part of a broader backlash to progress. And while I am disheartened and discouraged that we've seen this backlash, I am more determined than ever to fight it and expand the right to vote. And so that's why this morning, I'm announcing legislation that I filed with Terry Sewell, and Senator Angela Also Brooks will be filing in the Senate to address deceptive voting practices and voter intimidation that we've seen on the rise recently.
One of the things that I was trying to connect the dots on this morning, and I think it's a really, really important thing to do in a moment like this one where we're watching what's happening in Texas, is it's not just that they're trying to rig the rules and rig the election in their favor. I think that one of the things that we miss is we're not talking enough about the reason why they're doing that and why they're doing it starting in a state like Texas. And that is because the demographics in a state like Texas are changing and have changed to the point where that white landowning man that you talked about historically, that were the only folks who were granted the right to vote and participate in democracy, that because of things like the Voting Rights Act, we are now moving towards a multiracial democracy. And a state like Texas is a state where that's happening quicker than other places. Can you talk a bit about the reason why they're trying to rig these elections? Because I feel like that's what's being missed when we're talking about Texas, and it's driving me a little nuts.
Well, I alluded to it, but the history of this country from the beginning has been, how do we reconcile the ideals upon which we were founded by the reality upon which we were founded? And when we make progress to expand those ideals to communities of color, to marginalized groups, to women, anyone beyond the original white land owning English men who founded Jamestown, there is that backlash, and it always involves three things: propaganda, violence, and voter suppression, because they believe that the people perpetrating the backlash believe that that is the only way they can maintain power. That's what we're seeing exactly. As you said, this backlash includes all three. And a lot of the propaganda is intended to deceive voters or to intimidate voters who won't vote for the ideas and I think the Republican Party knows they can't win on the merits of their ideas, so they want to suppress the vote. And they want to manipulate information in order to frankly lie to people to either keep them from voting
Yeah.
or have them vote for them. And so this backlash, this tactic is as old as democracy. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, I wrote a 50-page article once about the history of Voting Rights Act, where you see this cycle at least 3 or 4 times in American history.
Yeah.
But this is the modern version of that.
It's such an important point, and I feel like one of the things that we are missing, as I said, is the reason, right? That they're doing all of these things for a reason, and also our memories are so short. Not just going back to 60 years ago, but even back to the debate and the fight over HR 1. Because as
Mhm.
we watch them try to rig the election in the 2026 midterms starting in Texas, no one's really pointing out that the Democrats tried
Mhm.
to, in the beginning of the Biden administration, push forward HR 1, which would do a lot to prevent what's happening right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's as simple, the easy what should have been easy, that this what should have been easy in reauthorizing the parts of the Voting Rights Act that were struck down that had been passed on a bipartisan basis for, nearly 50 years, that all of a sudden now Republicans say, no, we can't do that. Um, and it's really unfortunate because our democracy, our republic is being stressed to the breaking point, and going after, voter suppression and voter intimidation is the tool that autocracies use to gain and maintain power. And we could have stopped all of this by passing HR 1, or in 2013, just reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act at a minimum. Um, but the other important point is now, the other check on voter suppression has always been a free press. And so at the same time you have this attack on voting rights, you also see an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of the press as a way to further allow dis and misinformation to be used to even further suppress the vote. So it's all
It's
connected.
Oh, it's all connected. I connect dots all the time. That's really how my brain works. Can you talk a bit about the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court is preparing to reconsider Section 2 in
Yeah.
Louisiana and North Dakota. And I feel like, on the heels of the 2013 Shelby case and what we've lived through since then, it's important for folks to understand the ramifications if they continue to gut the Voting Rights Act.
I mean, remember why the Voting Rights Act was passed to begin with. I mean, the 15th Amendment in, I think it was 1870, outlawed voter discrimination. And yet, after Reconstruction, states all across the South came up with very creative ways to disenfranchise Black men. That's, the literacy test my great grandfather had to take on its face did not appear discriminatory, but the registrar that gave the questions chose what questions to give. And when he got the questions all right, the registrar said, I need more questions because this N word got them all right. They were intentionally used to disenfranchise on the basis of race. And that's why the Voting Rights Act was put in place. By gutting it, the Supreme Court, John Roberts in particular, assumed, well, racism doesn't exist anymore. Well, we've seen that's fiction, that fantasy, frankly. Um, and so now going after Section 2 was designed to ensure minority communities had the ability to elect the candidate of their choice because they were often packed into districts so that their voting power was diluted in other districts, or they were cracked and spread out so thinly that they could not gain any meaningful political power to elect the candidate of their choice. And Section 2 was designed to prevent that by preventing racial gerrymandering. If that falls, the pre-clearance provision has already fell. Um, we already see a Justice Department that refuses to enforce the Civil Rights Act. I mean, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. We see a Supreme Court that is increasingly making it more difficult for people to sue on their own behalf to protect their rights. In the birthright citizenship case, by saying you basically have to be part of a class action. It is all designed to not only undo, using the Voting Rights Act to undo the very protections that it put in place. But it is doing so in a way that makes it very difficult for people to exercise or protect their individual right to vote, which again, I go back to how I started. In a government by, of, and for the people, your vote is your power. If power is derived from the people in this country, which was a revolutionary idea at the time and still is, and yet you are preventing people from exercising that power to choose their representatives by instead having representatives choose their voters, then that's just one more hit that our republic takes as it's being stress tested to the breaking point.
I want to connect this conversation about voting rights to the immigration policies that we're watching right now as well, because I feel like it is not a coincidence that the Trump administration is engaged in a mass deportation, of what I've really started calling mass detention policy without due process, at a moment where the demographics of the people that they are detaining and deporting are the same as the demographics that are growing in many states in the country. How do Democrats begin to make that connection as to the core reason, going back to our original point in the conversation, the core reason why all of this is happening right now?
I think we've got to, as you say, connect the dots and make sure people understand we are in the backlash. Because I'll connect another dot. Why is there a war on teaching a complete and accurate history, even if it's uncomfortable? Because when you know that history, you recognize the pattern. And part of the pattern of the backlash is, well, when you have propaganda, you need a scapegoat. You need a villain that you can attack. And in response to Reconstruction, that villain was Black men who were gaining social, political, and economic power. Now it's immigrants who are gaining social, political, and economic power. And despite what the administration says, they're not just going after violent criminals who are here illegally, they're also picking up US citizens or trying to redefine birthright citizenship because they made their villain immigrants. Oh, and by the way, trans children. And so they have to go after that villain, but they also need to take away their political, social, and economic power because they're afraid they can't, there's not enough to share.
Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, representative of Virginia's 4th District, thank you so much for being here on the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. Such an important conversation to have. It is the foundation of American democracy and our ability to have any political power at all, social and economic as well. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.